Thankfully, it seems, at least in Southern Ontario, that stock of the Nintendo Switch 2 is pretty good. I didn't pre-order. On release day, I didn't really have time to look around. But a day later, I found a Switch 2 at GameStop, or EB Games, or whatever they call themselves these days. I mean, they've been bought recently, so they're going to be EB Games again, right? Anyway, I have the Mario Kart World bundle. A little annoyed that I don't have a physical copy of Mario Kart, but it's going to be the most sold game for the Switch 2, probably, so once this console generation is over, I'll just pick up a copy for cheap. You gotta think ahead, right? But let's actually open up the console first, and then I'll give you a few impressions on various things. The box looks a bit like the Switch 1 packaging, except there's a big 2 on there, also it's a bit smaller. Opening the box up, I can see how the thing with the staples going into the screen thing happened. Not that stapling anything to a box is acceptable. Inside, there's the Joy-Con and the Switch 2 itself. Underneath, there's the rest of the stuff. Dock, power adapter, which is a USB-C power brick now, USB-C cable, HDMI cable, and a Joy-Con grip. Plus, there's these 2 safety straps that also double as pads to make them better for mouse-type gameplay. In terms of hardware, how the Joy-Con mount and detach are probably one of the more interesting things about the console. It's done through magnets now. The connection to the system or grip is very solid. There are little levers that you push against to separate the Joy-Con from whatever they're attached to. Basically, a little plunger extends and pushes the Joy-Con off. The power of levers. I also like the buttons. I thought they were a bit too stiff on the original Switch. Here they feel a tad easier to actuate. The dock has 2 USB-A ports on the side. The back panel is detachable and has ports for power in the form of USB-C, HDMI out, of course, and an Ethernet port. The stand feels solid. It's made out of metal. The game cartridge cover feels better. It's easier to undo, and it's got a metal bit inside which makes putting it back in place easier. Just to answer some hardware questions that some people may have, the consoles aren't compatible with each other's docks. The Switch 1 AC adapter isn't powerful enough to run TV mode on the Switch 2, but you can charge the system with it according to Nintendo. You can't attach the original Joy-Con to the Switch 2, but you can pair them with the new system. Same with the original Switch Pro controller. Keep in mind that the original Joy-Con do need to be charged with a charge grip or docking station-like thing. I transferred my data over from an original Switch, or very specifically an OLED Switch, not that that matters. The process is very easy. I didn't even need to get a micro SD card for it. The built-in storage is enough for now. The menus are all very familiar. Everything is where you think it would be if you have an original Switch. There's some design tweaks to certain things and also different sounds. And also the store isn't slow as hell now, which is a nice thing. I tried several games, but I figured I should start with Mario Kart World since that's the only actual Switch 2 game that I have. Well, again, unless you're talking, the Zelda games, but, that's later in the video. Finally, more than 10 years later, we actually have a brand new Mario Kart game, not like with the Switch and Mario Kart 8, because that was a Wii U game. I like that the handling feels different to Mario Kart 8, and Mario Kart World is just, it has a different feel. The graphical style changed a bit, you may have noticed. Certain elements have a darker defined edge, and look a bit cartoony, like the drifting effects, for example. The game looks great overall, though on some tracks you notice that some of the textures seem lower resolution than in Mario Kart 8. That's really noticeable in Moo Moo Meadows. The point-to-point races seem fun so far. I like how you can recognize corners and tracks from past games, but it's in a new context, so it feels new and familiar at the same time. I like that you can now grind on poles. That wording probably could have been better, but I think you know what I mean. I'm not used to driving the game in that way, but I've seen some clips and stuff where people have been finding alternate routes and shortcuts, so that's something that seems like it's worth playing around with. The costumes are fun, and so are the fact that you can drive as creatures now. It's fun to see such a large roster in a game such as this. I do have a complaint that in online races, when you first join, it takes forever sometimes before you can actually drive. If you're joining an in-progress race, you just drive around in an open world, which honestly isn't that fun. I'd rather just be able to watch the race. With that being said, the free roam thing in general just doesn't appeal to me. Like, what is there to do? I'm sure there's stuff. Maybe if you get a bunch of friends together, but I don't know. Generally, it's kind of boring. Going back to online multiplayer, the races are super chaotic, partly because races feature 24 cars now. I do like the knockout races. I think that's pretty fun. It's a nice additional game mode that complements Grand Prix mode. The game runs at 60 FPS. I don't think it's fully 4K. It doesn't look upsampled either. I just don't see those upsampling artifacts, so I'm gonna guess it's 1440p. Anyway, this isn't a review of the game, so let's go on to something else. As you can imagine, Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom look pretty good on the Switch 2 with their fancy Switch 2 upgrades. It does cost money, but it's part of the Nintendo online subscription, so if you got, if you have that, well, you have access to it if you have the Switch 1 games. The before and after is pretty striking. Without it, they look and feel like they do on the Switch. With it, they run at high resolution. Not sure if it's 4K or 1440p. I only played it a little bit. The high resolution does make it obvious that some of the textures are a bit ugly, which is interesting. But the 60 FPS is very nice. A similar effect can be seen with Pokemon Violet. Finally, 60 FPS in a Pokemon game again. When's the last time we had that? Maybe like the Gen 3 games on the GBA, I think? But anyways, it's interesting again that the high resolution makes the game more ugly in some ways. And it's easier to see all the flaws, which, they're already obvious in Pokemon Violet. Now, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet got patched to take advantage of the Switch 2's hardware. Pokemon Shield is an example of a game that hasn't been. No frame rate increase, probably because it's capped at 30, and the resolution is still at 1080p or lower. It's funny though, Shield looks so much nicer than Violet even though it's older. I also tried Splatoon 3 and the results were the same. So for the most part it seems that games need to be patched in order to take advantage of the newer hardware. But there can still be instances of improvements with unpatched games. I tried Neptunia V2, which is capped at 60 FPS. Very optimistic since it almost never reaches that frame rate on the original Switch. But because the Switch 2 is more powerful, the game runs at that frame rate consistently. Unfortunately, it's a bit ugly and flat looking compared to its PS4 and PC counterparts. Basically, it looks the same as on the Switch 1. Frame rates being the only improvement there. So theoretically, even unpatched Switch 1 games can run more consistently if they had frame rate dips and performance issues on original hardware. If anybody knows, I'd love to know how things are when it comes to unpatched games with dynamic resolution. Does it behave like it does on original hardware? Or does it stay at a higher resolution than before? In theory, it should run closer to or at its target resolution. Anyway, I tried a few other games and didn't see any obvious improvements. It would have been nice if it was like the PS5 where the older games just ran and looked better, generally speaking. I tried mouse mode a little bit. When I say I tried it, it's just on the main menu. At first impression, it seems like it behaves like a regular mouse. I've tried it with my left and right hand and it feels natural. I don't really have a table set up in front of my TV that allows for comfortable mouse use though, but it's nice that the option is there. I'm looking forward to having and trying out mouse controls in future games. I'm going to guess Splatoon 4 is going to have that option. Just as a side note, the L and R buttons, you may remember on the original Switch, I mentioned that I sometimes hit them by accident because they wrap around the side a bit. But because of the mouse thing, the wrap around of those buttons is even more. So at first I kept hitting L and R by accident, but you get used to it and it's kind of rare for me to now hit those buttons, but just so you know if you're prone to that yourself. I should also say that I have been and will be primarily playing in docked mode. With a handheld that big, it all gets a bit carpal tunnel-y for me, though desktop mode is probably going to be something I make use of occasionally. I do like the improvement in resolution. I think 1080p is good for this size screen. I guess now I'll just wait for some more games to come out. I'm looking forward to Pokemon Legends ZA, plus whatever the new mainline games will be. Plus all the other Nintendo stuff that every Nintendo console gets, like Zelda, a 2D and 3D Mario game, Fire Emblem, and Splatoon. And I hope that Japanese niche game developers will release games on the Switch too, like they have been with the first generation Switch. I think there's also several games that came out for the Switch one that ran and looked kind of terrible, which would be a good candidate for a patch or a remaster. For example, the Atelier Ryza games. Just throwing it out there. I guess we'll see what happens. If you have a Switch 2 yourself, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And if you don't have one, is the Switch something you want to get, or is it something you're going to pass on? So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.